Thank you, Bill. One of my dear friends, John L., lives in the Phoenix area. And growing up in South Africa, there was separation between people they had known and worked with. And there's this wonderful song, From Every Stormy Wind That Blows. And a wonderful verse in that song says, "Though sundered far, by faith they meet around one common mercy seat." And we have members of our congregation who physically aren't able to be with us today. So I want to welcome you to our study, and we have other people who listen in as well. I want us to begin today at the very bottom at the back, and two reasons for this. This will be, in a sense, homework for today, something I'd like for you to do before next week, because we will introduce some things, and hopefully this will make more sense. The second thing is that there's always some people listening who may not have a copy of the outline, and if that is you, I'd like for you to get a piece of paper. If you have it written down, you don't need to write these down. But we're going to look at three different things today that have to do with how application was made to the letters. And let me go ahead and do the verses quickly, and then, like I said, the outlines are there on the back communion table, and this will be really helpful to have this. The first term we're going to talk about as we kind of come to this in a minute, they're called formal petitions. And if you'll notice, we have three of these in our letters. One is Galatians 4 and verse 10, and then 2 Corinthians 5 and 20, and 2 Corinthians 10 and 2. So Galatians 4:10, 2 Corinthians 5:20, and then 10:2. The second group are called familiar requests. And if you notice, a petition's a little more formal, request is a little less formal as such. And these are going to be in Philippians 4 and 3, 1 Thessalonians 4 and verse 1, and there's two of these, and our translations will say something like, "I ask and request." So in 1 Thessalonians 4 and verse 1, the familiar one is the first one. Then there's one in chapter 4 and verse 12, and then 2 Thessalonians 2 and verse 1. The ones that we'll come back to, Lord willing, next week, and this to me is very significant because I think of this as kind of the signature in the heart of Paul's ministry. And for those of us, and you just go down the line, those of us who are parents, who are seeking to develop faith in the next generation, grandparents' generations, those of us that teach and preach, these have become really significant to me, and hopefully they will begin to make more sense as we go through. And they're just called personal requests. And there's several of these. And to me, this is Paul's signature of ministry. And like I said, this will make more sense as we go through class. But Romans 12 and verse 1, and then there's two more in Romans, chapter 15 and 30, 16 and 17. And then there's three in 1 Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 1 and 10, 4:16, 16:15. And then Ephesians 4 and verse 1, Philippians 4 and verse 2, 1 Thessalonians 4 and verse 1, in this case it's the second one of these requests, 2 Thessalonians 3 and 12, 1 Timothy 2 and 1, and Philemon 9 and 10. Before we look at the outline, I just want to ask something. And I don't know how, well, every family is different in this regard. I don't know whether this might have been your mom or your dad, but if while you were growing up, you were asked to do something in your family, but you were dragging your feet, what happened after you were told the first time to do this and you hadn't? Okay? In our family, our dad told us one time, and then we got struck by lightning. It was one time. It was very clear, very specific, and there were immediate consequences. Immediate. With our mother, however, the first warning, and this is how we heard it more often in our house, was Marshall Kent Hartman. So when Mom used all three of your given names the first time, she was kind of putting you on notice. If you still were dragging your feet and then you heard your name the second time, things were getting a little closer. But when they were in all caps and underlined, and you heard Marshall Kent Hartman the third time, you were about to pass from grace to judgment. And that's how Mom functioned. And like I said, with Dad, it was just one time, and that was it. But with Mom, we had a little bit of time to kind of warm up and decide if we were really going to drag our feet or deal with this. For my younger brother, if he could get a laugh, it was always worth a spanking. That was always in the equation for him. Being the older brother, that was never a part of my mentality, but those of you who know my younger brother, as long as you can get a laugh, that's worth a spanking. And so that's why we heard more often Marshall Kent Hartman than any of the rest of us. But when we heard all three names, we were supposed to do something. Today, when we write letters and emails, we may go into all caps. We may underline. And what we're going to see, because in some areas, more than the majority of the population was illiterate. But letter writing conventions were developed so that even illiterate people could run a business. Now, Lord willing, next week, our two illiterates are going to be Daryl and Mark running a business. I don't know if there's any truth in this or not. I just happen to know two guys that work in the same company. But one of them is going to be down toward the Mediterranean on the Nile, and the other is going to be further up. And so if they want to communicate to each other and they're illiterate, what do? They're scribes. They may be under a tree, they may be at a corner, and you go to this scribe and you just briefly describe who you're writing to, and this will tell him some terms that he's supposed to put in the letter, and then one will dictate the letter and give it to a soldier or a traveler or something. They will get on the interstate, which in Egypt is what? The Nile. And the wind tends to blow upstream, so if you're going upstream, you put up the sails. The Nile's coming toward the Mediterranean. If you're coming down the Nile, you let the current carry you down. And this person then will carry the letter to the other business partner, and with him being illiterate, what does he do? He goes to the tree or the corner in his neighborhood and gives this to the local scribe, and he reads it to it, and enormous amounts of communication were taking place in the first century between people who couldn't read or write. But because they are going to dictate this, then there have been at least 2 letter writing manuals discovered telling people this is how you write things, and there's a certain way when you want to say, now I want you to do this, that then was used by people in the first century. And this will be taking us toward our letters. Our central idea today is that these requests in our New Testament letters are going to be based on relationship and rather than rank. And I'm using rank today in terms of an apostle. The term I'm going to use that just kind of rings in my head is orders from headquarters. Okay? Paul typically is not going to do that. And we'll start seeing examples of that today. And what I want us to do today, and this is our application from the very beginning, as we work through our lesson through the week, I'd like for you to look at these petitions and requests on the bottom of the back page through the week. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that these are the specific things that Paul is asking, requesting the readers of these letters to do. Wayne, in education, we might call it a behavioral objective. The student will be able to list, the student will be able to describe, the student will be very specific. And in this letter writing convention, when it came time to say, this is what I want you to do, Marshall Kent Hartman in my family, this is what I want you to do, then you would use one of these specific request forms, and so then the person wouldn't have any doubt about what are we supposed to do now that we have this letter. Now, some of you are thinking, why are we doing this? Well, before we make application to us 2,000 years later, I think it helps us to understand what the application was primarily for people in the first century. A text should never say something to us that it would never have said to a person in the first century. Can I say the same thing in reverse? The better we understand what the people were asked to do in the first century context, then the better we can make application 2,000 years later, because what's that wonderful description? And I've heard my brother say this a number of times. None of the Bible was written to us. All of the Bible was written for us. And so the better we understand how people were to respond to the things that were written in the first century, that understanding then helps us, whether we're talking to our children, our grandchildren, a Bible class, a person who's not a Christian. And so our whole focus today, and this is the application, when you go home, this is what I want you to do. I want you to read through these petitions within the specific type, and this is what class is today, is that we're just going to explain these. I'm not going to go into a great amount of detail. And what I'd like for you to do is then go home and with what you've learned today, read each of these petitions and requests, and then notice how this starts changing the way you see the whole letter. Because if you know what the bottom line is, this is what I want you to do, then what we're going to suggest is that all of the things in the letter are there to help the readers to do what those specific requests are. Okay? So just kind of process that as we go through. Have you ever worked for a boss or a supervisor who was overly authoritative and dictatorial? Some of you may be there right now. How did you feel about going to work, and how was the morale in your office or department? We had a dear friend, Frances, we were in Memphis together, Newark, Oklahoma Christian. She worked in downtown Memphis. I don't know what floor they were on, but occasionally, not too often, but occasionally, her boss would get mad, yank the phone out the wall, and throw it out the window. And they'd have to bring a glass company in to replace the glass. People walked on eggshells in that office. I mean, can you imagine that? And of course, we're talking about dial phones in those days. But a guy taking his phone, he's so upset, and he throws it out the office window. It was like working with Hitler, you know, just ta-da-ta-da-ta-da-ta-da. And in Roman society, a lot of people would have understood this high rank and official because, as we've talked about, the society was very much a pyramid, and the closer you got to the top, the more authoritative your orders were. And everyone knew what an edict was, either from the governor or from Caesar. And so people were very familiar with that from society. And if you look at 1:1, one of the most clearly defined relationships was that of client and patron. And you'll see where a person will do favors for people in order to get them to help, and there's a whole bunch of things. They may help run the business, they may help them to get elected, but the client-patron relationship was very, very familiar to people, and they understood that very well. 1:2, when you got a request from a patron, it may have been less a request and closer to an order. And if you didn't respond, then that benefit might be withheld, it might be withdrawn. And so the minority of those in the highest rank control the rest of the people in society, and they impose their will on these people quite frequently. And this is a significant passage in Luke 22. And look at very carefully what Jesus says. A dispute arose among them as to which of them was to be regarded as the greatest. And he said to them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and those in authority over them are called benefactors. Not so among you. And from the very beginning, Jesus tells his apostles, you're very familiar with what people in high rank do in terms of getting their way. And you understand very well, and I would just go ahead and use our term orders. You understand the orders that they give. That's not how we're to function, what we're going to call later the body of Christ. And I want you to notice number 3. Well, let's do number 2 first. Those in high position didn't make requests. They gave edicts or orders that came with very negative consequences for those who didn't comply. And again, I'm in a Roman history class, and Professor Judd said, when you read an edict from Caesar and you read what we call the 7 letters to the churches, he said, I don't dispute the word letters, but he said, these are more nearly edicts. And notice what is said. The revelation of Jesus Christ is given to these churches, and here's a sample. To the angel of the church in Ephesus write, and they're going to give an honest assessment of each of these churches. Explanations are going to be given, shortcomings. But what is said to the church in Ephesus? If you do not repent, I will come and remove your lampstand. This is not a friendly, hello, how's everybody doing? This is what's taking place. This is the assessment. This is what's wrong. And just like a Roman edict, here are the consequences. If you don't respond, this is what's going to take place. And everybody in society was very familiar with that type of communication. Here's something, again, that just strikes me as so interesting about our New Testament. One of the most unique aspects of Christianity compared to world religions is the number of letters that form the basis of our doctrine and ethical behavior. And when you look at our New Testament, 21 out of our 27 documents are letters. And you don't find anything like that. You'll find these philosophical writings, and if you try to read through, bless your heart, if you read through Confucius or some of these other people, and there's all these philosophical things, and it's just a very unique aspect of New Testament Christianity that if you just, and not space, but you're just counting documents, the majority of our documents in the New Testament are letters. How interesting. And how different is the tone of a letter compared to, and I just gave this, the 10 Commandments written on stone. Begin to see the contrast in that, even within the Old and the New Covenant. How different is it to get a letter to the church in Rome from Paul rather than having, here are the 10 Commandments, the things that you must do. 3:2 is something very significant, and I want to just kind of stop here just for a second. A number of years ago, there was limited contact in some places and more in others between what we just came to call the Boston movement. And basically what they did was that as a person becomes a Christian, then they would be linked to either terms were used, a prayer partner or a senior prayer partner, and this person would dictate and control an awful lot of their behavior, literally. And he is not there now, but for a few years there was a man named James Walters. He taught Greek at Harding and Searcy, and I listened to a tape where he was just evaluating what are some concerns, what's wrong with the Boston movement. And he said something I'll always remember. He said, one of the essential characteristics of New Testament Christianity is the righteous will live by faith. And then here it came. He said, if a person only has a mustard seed faith, we must allow them to live by the faith that they have, or they're not living by faith. Isn't that true? And just think about that. The righteous will live by faith. And let's just say, Craig's been contacted, he becomes a Christian, he's a brand new babe in Christ. Well, we can't expect him to live by Wayne. Wayne, how long have you been a Christian now? Got a calculator? A long time. Okay, that'll do. See, we can't have the same expectation that Craig, both in behavior and life and other things, as a new babe in Christ, And see, what if Wayne is his senior prayer partner and Wayne's expecting him to live at that level? Craig's not living by the faith that he has. And my interpretation of this is that it's like learning to walk on a tight wire with no net. You think you're able to do things, and then all of a sudden you're not. And very destructive things have happened to a lot of people. People gone into hiding, all kinds of things. And think about this, the righteous will live by faith. Of all things. Habakkuk. How would you ever expect one of the main principles of the New Testament is first given to us in type and shadow by the prophet Habakkuk, and then we're going to find it in Romans, in Galatians, and in Hebrews. And so I'm in 3:4. If Peter or Paul write a letter, and the readers see this as these are orders from the top, I must do this. Following orders is totally different than responding by choice, by faith. And so here's something very significant, and this is 3:5. There will be rare occasions that Paul will give an order, and we'll see one of those. I command you. And there are times that he will do that. I command you, if a man won't work, neither shall he eat. Okay? And this will happen, but there are about 4 or 5 words for orders and commands, and guess where the majority of them are in our New Testament? They're in the Gospels. Jesus will command an evil spirit to come out of him. Jesus will command someone, you take up your mat and walk. The majority of the orders in the New Testament are given by Jesus as he heals people. They are not given by Christians to younger Christians or new Christians for how to live. Now, if you've been in a number of different churches, especially in different parts of the country, there are different ways that different churches apply behavior standards and consequences to that. And I want us to follow through and look at this. Here's the bold on 3:5, and this is the heart of what we're talking about today. Paul prefers to make requests based on relationship rather than his spiritual rank as an apostle. When you look at Paul's letters, the only time Paul says, be imitators of me as I am of Christ, are to churches that he has started. If Paul has heard about their faith and hasn't been there, then he doesn't say to them, you follow me as I follow Christ. And because they share that relationship together, then he calls upon them to do that. And people that he doesn't share that relationship, he talks to them even differently. I want us to read an example, and because this just kind of summarizes in one example today, Lord willing, we're going to be looking at Colossians and Philemon. And if you notice as we look through the list, there is not a specific request form in Colossians. As we're going to see in the next couple of weeks, there's about 10 different conventions that are available. Paul doesn't use them in every letter. There is not a request form in Colossians, but there is in Philemon. And the letter of Philemon is going to come to the church and to those who are there. And notice this, Paul's request is for Philemon to take back a runaway slave. And by law, when Onesimus shows up, then Philemon has the right to execute him, to kill him as a runaway slave. And so you think about the diplomacy of this. We're going to want the letter to get there before the runaway slave does. I mean, literally. We're going to want the letter to get there first. We're going to want Philemon to have a chance to have read this. We're going to want people to kind of know what's going to happen before this runaway slave shows up because of what the legal consequences are. And I want you to notice, we're going to read this quotation. Note how Paul differs from using his rank as an apostle, and he's going to appeal to their relationship. Now, I'm going to overstate this, but this is kind of what happens. Dear Philemon, don't take any notice that I'm in prison. Don't take any notice that I'm an apostle. Don't take any notice that you owe me your very soul. I wouldn't want that to influence your decision. And if there's any finances that are lacking, you can put that on my credit card and I'll pay for that. But I don't want that to have any effect on your decision. I want you to choose to do what you want to do. Do you see how different that is from orders from headquarters? And let's read the quotation. Though I am bold enough in Christ to command you to do what is required. See how specific Paul is? My friend, I could order you, this is what you are supposed to do. But notice what happens. Yet for love's sake, I prefer to appeal to you. And here it comes. I, Paul, don't let it notice, yes, I'm an old man, and my term is I'm a walking scar by now, by the stonings and the beatings. I'm now a prisoner for Jesus Christ, and here comes the word, I appeal to you for my child Onesimus, whose father I have become in my imprisonment. And these words, I appeal to you, I urge you, I beg you, in some translations, is this personal petition. And we'll come back and talk about this again next week, and I'll use the same example if this is just so appropriate. One of our deacons at Eastside for years and years was the defensive coordinator for the Carl Albert football team. And we have fed the guys a meal on Friday for probably 20 years. And when the season starts, even before the season starts, and if Kelly's coming out for the first time, then Kelly gets a 3-ring binder. Here's his character notebook. And before you put on any pads or any practice, you go through, you read this, you go through this with a coach, and you sign, this is what I agree to do this year in terms of my character. And all of that takes place before you ever touch a football. If Kelly messes up, then he brings his character notebook into the coach, and they sit down and they talk about that and what the consequences are. And as soon as Gary starts talking to parents and other things, he says, they call me a football coach, but I'm really here to develop character in young men. And my conviction is if we develop character, we're going to win our share of games, but I'm actually here to develop character in young men. And the day I can't pray individually or with my team, I resign. 0 profanity. Not tolerated at all. What a great partnership for a church to have with a program that's developing character. But the other team's marching down the field, they get inside the 20, coaches call timeout, and over again, I've seen our coaches go over and put an arm around a captain and say, okay, Greg, we draw the line right here. We have got to stop them. And it's this pulling the person close to them. And the word here, and listen very carefully, parakaleo. When you hear para, do you hear parable? Earthly story with a heavenly meaning. Parakaleo is to call someone close to you. And our guys would run through a wall for these coaches. And over again, not having as good a talent, not being as strong as big as athletic as, 11 brothers can beat a group of stars if they're working together. And over, I've seen these coaches call timeout, pull this guy close to them and say, okay, guys, we got to stop them right here. They're doing as much with heart and with faith as they are with body. And look at what Paul is telling Philemon. I prefer to appeal to you. And there's our word. In print, he's reaching out, putting his arm around him and pulling him close to him because of relationship rather than giving him an order. If you've been in church very long, you have seen kids that have left home when dad has dictated faith rather than letting the kids learn and grow and develop and walk by their own faith. And as soon as they could get out, they left. And you look at this as a sample. Here is a term to, through print, pull a person close to you, to appeal to relationship, to appeal to their higher motives. And this is going to be the basis for him forgiving and bringing a runaway slave back into his house. The pun in here is that the word Onesimus means useful. And Paul says, he who is useful became useless. He ran away. And if you're a runaway slave, when would be a good time to run away? In the middle of a harvest season when things are really busy, when there's a lot of traffic. You don't want to be running away in the dead of winter when no one's out on the road. You may have been given an assignment, whatever. You just think if you're going to be a runaway slave, you have to be very calculated about when you're going to try to get away to be able to not be detected and to slip off to Rome to live there. And whatever the conditions were, this would have brought some harm to Philemon. And Paul just simply says, he who was useful to you became useless. I am sending him back to you. I am sending my very heart. I would have been glad to keep him with me in order that he might serve me on your behalf during my imprisonment for the gospel, but I preferred to do nothing without your consent, in order that your goodness might not be by compulsion, but of your own accord. Do you see how significant this is? This is Paul's signature of ministry. This is how he got things done. Raising 3 kids, but 2 of them being girls, how do you go about saying, sweetheart, that may be a little bit short, that may be a little tight, before they leave the house without having a huge confrontation? Okay? Mrs. H didn't like this term, but I told her girls, you're daughters of a Church of Christ preacher. Somewhere between working on a pole and being a nun is where we're going to live. I don't know why she didn't like this analogy, but anyway, she did. But I said, there's a middle ground here somewhere between these 2 things. I don't want you looking like a nun, and I reserve the right, which happened maybe 3 times, and said, sweetheart, this looks really nice on you. However, Dad needs another layer, or Dad needs something else, and we want you to be fashionable. But, now, what would happen if it was just an open confrontation? Do you see what I'm talking about? And at some point, you want the girls to develop also a sense of what is appropriate without it just being, well, as soon as I get out of this house, then I'm going to dress like I want to. And as our kids get older, we need to have a reverse thing between hands-on discipline and allow them to make more choices, but still guide them. But one of our objectives is for them to learn how to do this because they choose to want to do this and not because they have just been ordered how to do that. And that just applies in so many different areas. And can you see from this example how Paul went about allowing the person to live by the faith that they had and calling upon their best motives, their best intentions, the love that we share together, and all of those things were the basis for the request that was going to be made? Here's 4:1. Giving orders or relying on rank of being an apostle in order to get people to act would actually destroy what Paul is trying to build. Paul wants Philemon to voluntarily, and that's why every time I read Philemon, I just laugh. Old man, in prison, don't let that affect you at all. And then, like I said, as he goes on through, oh, by the way, when someone says you do owe me your very soul, Paul probably taught him the gospel. Don't let that have any influence on what you're going to choose to do. And he goes out of his way to not give orders from headquarters, this is how you're to respond. And I'm going to suggest, both for those of us who lead in churches, elders and preachers, those of us that are parents, grandparents, those of us that are Bible class teachers, we have a lot to learn from the manner in which Paul went about calling upon people to live lives of faith. And notice this. Paul wants Philemon to voluntarily act on his own faith and free will rather than to feel compelled by an apostolic dictate. And this is what I've said. I think this lets us see the style of Paul's letters. And even in the Corinthians, I do not want to be frightening you by my letters. Some say his letters are weighty and strong. His bodily presence is weak. His speech is of no account. Let such a person understand that what we say by letter when absent, we will be when present. And so what's interesting to me is that through the letters, I can detect Paul's style of ministry. And he says, what I say in my letters is what I am in person. And 2,000 years later, then we can learn a lot from that. And there's a whole group of other things here that we won't get into today. I'll just point you to number 5 on the back page. Paul dictated most of his letters. And look at these number of references. You'll see in Romans, Tertius wrote this letter down. Oh, see what with large letters I write? This particular part, this is how I write. And so when you see in Timothy, when you see one of these guys with him, Paul is going to dictate the letter. We're not given why. Is it eyesight? Some wonder. Again, I wonder with the beatings and the stonings and the other things. But when you look at these letters, it's very clear that they're primarily dictated down. I want us to do, in the middle of the page, these 4 things, and then this will kind of get you ready to look at next week. When they started finding these papyri letters out of the sands of Egypt, and this started in the very, very late 1800s, and the first volume of what's called the Oxyrinsis Papyri is published in 1898. And just a year or so ago, volume 83 has been published. Maybe 1 or 2% of what has been found has been published so far. And as we said, it doesn't rain in Egypt, so the papyri is not going to rot. It gets buried in the sand, and unless these little sandworms get to it, it's kept at perfect museum temperature. And so for the first time, our generations have had access to personal letters that people wrote in the first century that were outside the New Testament. But look at these 4 different types of petitions that are made. The first one is a routine petition. I call this Dear Nameless and Faceless. If you're writing to a government official, please do this. This is not in the New Testament because we know each other. We're brothers and sisters. But here are the ones that are. A formal petition is the word you would use if you're writing to the governor. And I'm going to immediately use the word distance. If you're writing to a person that's in a higher position and you want them to do something, either for you or your family or your organization, then this shows the respect and it shows distance because of office. I also found 3 women who are in divorce proceedings with their husbands. Are we going to do this warm and fuzzy sweetheart type thing if we're going through divorce proceedings with our husbands? So when we want to show distance between the reader and the writer, this is the term that we're going to use. And if you'll notice on the bottom, Galatians and 2 Corinthians have a formal petition in them. Anticipate. Galatians is the only book that doesn't have a thanksgiving in it. Galatians is the only book where Paul doesn't call them saints. And when it comes time to request something, then he's going to use a formal petition, which shows there's some distance here. The familiar requests are between like families and friends, people who are close to each other. And see, if you're writing to a friend and you use a formal petition, that's not appropriate because there's not distance, there's closeness. And anticipate Philippians and Thessalonians. are the two letters where Paul reaches out and here's this relationship and this warmth, and he uses a totally different word, and it is a familiar request based on relationship. The third one is Paul's signature, and this is this par kaleo. And I'll just give you one example. We've done the one from Philemon. The primary petition in the book of in Philippians is, I urge Euodia and Syntyche to agree with each other in the Lord. Okay, don't stone me. This is true of men. But how many women in a church having real odds with each other do you need to have trouble? Okay? Don't laugh, Kelly. You're not supposed to laugh at this. But if two little guys in grade school get in a scuffle, they're going to fight and probably beat each other up for a little bit. And then by the end of the day, what have they done? They got their arms around each other and everything else. If two little girls fight, they're usually not hugging by the end of the day. And Euodia, EU is good, well done. Syntyche is to do things together. You read the book of Philippians and have this mind in you which was also in Christ. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. And when you read through the book of Philippians, this wonderful book, the actual request, and ladies, how would you like to have your name called in church on Sunday from a letter read from Paul? So what I'd like to invite you to do is read through the formal petitions, Galatians and 2 Corinthians, and notice the distance. Read the familiar request, and this will be Philippians as well, and Thessalonians, and you start doing this. And then when you read the personal request, here's this pull someone close to you, and here's the bottom line today. When you know what the request is for the letter, everything else in the letter is there to equip them and prepare them to do that. So I invite you, especially those of you who are Bereans, go through this week and read through the petitions and notice how this shapes the view of all the rest of the content that you find in that letter. God bless. Thank you.